What do Bianca Jagger and Versailles have in common? Let's find out. Here on Beauty History, we like to take deep dives into the lives of the famous people behind fashion brands and fashion labels. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the life of Yves Saint-Laurent. He was known for creating fashion looks for women that were both comfortable and elegant. He was an iconic French designer and to this day is regarded as being one of the most prominent designers during the 20th century. Now, your homework for beauty history is to subscribe to the channel and to like the video. He was born to a well-to-do, prominent French family in Algeria. He had his mother and a father, and he also had two sisters, and he actually greatly admired both his mother and his sisters. He spent a lot of his childhood playing with his sisters and specifically playing with paper dolls. He was obsessed. He loved cutting out the paper dolls and playing with them. It was one of his favorite hobbies. And he also loved his mother's fashion magazines, and he would cut those out as well. So that dress, designing, fashion spark was there from the moment he was born, basically. And it was encouraged. It wasn't something that was squashed or discouraged because it was a very feminine thing. We're talking about the 1930s here. He was encouraged to pursue this. However, he did grow up in a more macho environment, and he was a sensitive gay boy. He didn't really thrive in that environment, so he drew inward. He was pretty shy. He spent a lot of time playing with his sisters and just in his own little bubble, his little fantasy. As he grew up to be a teenager, he still loved playing with paper dolls, and he loved his mother's fashion magazines. So what he did is he went through her elegant magazines and he cut out his favorite designs, his favorite models, and he created his own paper dolls, and he created his first bespoke custom Yves Saint-Laurent fashion line with the paper dolls. At the time he was still a teenager, he was very young, so he didn't have the resources to have an actual fashion house, but that didn't stop him. He found a way. At the age of 17, he entered a design contest, and he looks so young here. He looks like a baby because he's 17. This was an international design fashion contest. The judges for the contest were Pierre Balmain and Hubert de Givenchy. Okay, some big names. He won for the dress category. He won the first prize in that category. And in the coat or jacket category, do you know who won that one? Karl Lagerfeld. It's like, I don't know. Sometimes it's crazy the people you meet along the way in your career, and then, some of us just have normal lives, and some people have coworkers like Karl Lagerfeld and mentors like Givenchy and Dior and Balmain. We all lead very different lives. Shortly after this contest and making fabulous connections, a very young, still teenage Saint Laurent moved to Paris. I mean, that was the only route for him. He wasn't really going to stay in Algeria. There wasn't much for him there, so he moved to Paris to pursue fashion education, and he actually ended up working for Christian Dior. He worked under him. He wasn't allowed to submit any of his own sketches, his own work, which makes sense. He was just like a lowly, subordinate, but he was able to work at this grand, luxurious, feminine, elegant fashion house that at the time was already internationally renowned, internationally famous. There's a car honking. I'm not sure if you can hear that. I hope not. I'm just gonna go. And yeah, at that point, Christian Dior was already huge. So for him to be able to work there, even as a lowly assistant was a huge step up, especially for him at a young age. He really had mundane tasks, but he kept submitting his work. Like it was unofficial. Like he would just, be like, hey, here are some sketches that I've done just to show that I am actually capable of doing this. I know you will never use my sketches, but just to remind you. And he kept doing it season after season after season. And he eventually, rose above the ranks. And in 1956, Christian Dior appointed Yves Saint-Laurent as his successor. This was quite shocking because, Yves Saint-Laurent was still quite young, and Christian Dior was only 52 at the time. So people were a bit shocked that he chose a successor that was young, and also for him that he was still so young. 52 is quite young to choose your successor. But fate has a funny way of being, and Christian Dior actually passed away at a very young age. We sadly did not get to have his genius here with us on earth for very long because he passed away very suddenly in his early 50s, which is, I mean, the loss of life is always terrible, but this is very tragic. And he we really don't know much about Christian Dior's private personal life. Maybe he had an illness. We don't know. I'm not going to speculate. But anyway, he had chosen his successor. So when he passed tragically, a very young Yves Saint Laurent was now the head, the anchor of this huge brand. Talk about pressure. He was only 21 at the time, responsible for these massive budgets, these massive collections, lots of staff. He's responsible for making sure people still have jobs. This is a lot of pressure. And the first collection that he did for Christian Dior was a huge success, tremendous. Like, the clients loved it, the investors loved it, everyone loved it. It was fantastic, it was fabulous. He was just, people were a bit stressed about him at a young age taking over, but he proved himself. However, as collections go, there's always a next one, and he came out with the next collection, and it was an unmitigated disaster. I'm not sure why people thought this, but people thought this at the time. They thought that it was a complete flop, and people truly lost faith in Yves Saint Laurent for Christian Dior. They really thought, well, we knew it. He's too young, not experienced enough. He is a flop. At the same time that this was all happening in Paris, in Algeria was going through a very important decolonization war to claim its independence. And because Saint Laurent was French, he would actually be conscripted to fight for the French side during the Algerian War of Independence. According to some sources that I have read, there may have been some powers that be that at some point when he had first launched the first collection with Dior, and it was fabulous and making lots of money, people thought, okay, maybe we can pull a few strings, make sure he doesn't get conscripted, maybe his work here is more important. And then when he flopped real hard, perhaps, maybe, allegedly, no such efforts were done, and he was in fact drafted into the military. So as a sensitive, effeminate gay man in the late 50s, early 60s, military life was not for him. He was drafted, he was conscripted, he did not choose to participate in this war, and his military career was incredibly short. His military career lasted 20 days. He was conscripted. During those 20 days of military career, he experienced a particularly gruesome hazing experience at the hands of fellow soldiers that basically led him to have a mental breakdown, a nervous breakdown, whatever you want to use, and he was sent to a psychiatric military hospital. Saint Laurent would claim that for the rest of his life, the mental health problems that he'd had with depression, anxiety, and most importantly with substance abuse problems all stemmed from this experience, because at the military hospital, the treatment, quote unquote, that he received included things like electroshock therapy. He was given very heavy sedatives and opiates, and he was just pumped full of all sorts of drugs, and it was just a really, really bad experience. Not to make light of it. It was just a really, really bad experience, and at the time, I guess people thought that electroshock therapy would help him. It did not, and for the rest of his life, he battled very severely with problems with depression, anxiety, and substance abuse problems. On top of all that, once he finally left the hospital and went back to Paris, he found out that he no longer had a job. Basically, the second he got conscripted, Dior, the house, just like fired him, signed the papers, and they replaced him immediately. So no longer had he gone through all of that trauma, but also he was unemployed. However, at the same time, he would develop a relationship with Pierre Berger. He would be his romantic partner and business partner as well. And through his help with Pierre Berger, he was actually able to sue for breach of contract because basically just the things that had been done had not been done exactly properly to fire him. So he was able to get some financial compensation. And through that, he was able to get a win. And he achieved a little bit of financial freedom and independence. And through that, he was able to start his own label. I've read reports that are a bit confusing about Saint Laurent and Berger. So they were a couple, but some reports say that they broke up but stayed friends for a very long time, and some say that they broke up, stayed friends for a very long time, and then possibly got back together towards the end. So we'll touch on that. But basically, Saint Laurent and Berger were very important people to each other. They were very important to each other's lives. They helped each other in many ways when they were romantic partners or business partners or friends or confidants. You know, sometimes it's really nice to just have that constant in your life, that rock, that anchor in a good way. And that was who these people were for each other. And that's how Saint Laurent was able to actually get the Saint Laurent fashion house, was through, like, with help from Berger. Now, in the 1960s and into the 70s, this is where Saint Laurent really hit his stride. This is where things just ignited and launched for them. This was the 60s. We had counterculture, we had women's rights, women going into the workforce. It was just a very different time. And Saint Laurent, he got it. He understood it. He understood the messaging. He understood what people were looking for. And he loved to dress women in very elegant but also comfortable ways. And it's actually in the 1960s that he is the one who helped make ready-to-wear reputable and something to be proud of wearing. In the 1960s, Saint Laurent helped popularize a few trends, one of them being the beatnik look of the 1960s, the tall go-go boots from the 1960s. That's Yves Saint-Laurent. Yeah, that's why he is considered one of I think, for many people, he's considered the designer of the 20th century because he helped popularize and make these looks so iconic. And he also helped popularize the safari jackets. I used to have a safari jacket. That's all Yves Saint Laurent. But one look in particular that he is known for, that it's fashion history. Le smoking. This is a lady's or a woman's tuxedo. Obviously, wearing a suit is not that big of a deal. Men wear suits all the time. And even today, when we see red carpets, it's commonplace for a woman to wear a beautiful tailored suit on the red carpet. But do you know who made that possible? Yves Saint Laurent. He helped pioneer this androgynous, minimalistic look. He was a huge fan of it. He loved to dress women because he himself was effeminate and gay, and he felt, a little bit outside of culture and the norms. And he wanted to empower women and to help them dress in beautiful, comfortable, elegant ways so that they could feel more in place in society. So he sort of wanted, let's help each other out sort of attitude. And the Le smoking tuxedos, those suits are absolutely gorgeous. Bianca Jagger famously wore one when she married Mick Jagger, that beautiful white suit. It looks so chic with the hat and the veil, and that entire outfit looks gorgeous, looks amazing. He also came out with a very famous Mondrian line inspired by the Mondrian painting, and putting it into a dress. It looks so incredibly 1960s, the silhouette and the design, everything about that screams 1960s to me. And again, his legitimizing ready to wear or prêt-à-porter. Prêt-à-porter just means ready to wear. His legitimizing of this is considered to be his greatest contribution to fashion history. There were other designers at the time who were sort of inching towards this, but he is the one who was more explicit about his intention. He is credited as being the first designer to come out with a full ready-to-wear line and starting his full ready-to-wear boutique in Paris. And one of his first customers was Catherine Deneuve, who would go on to be one of his great muses in life. Something else that was very groundbreaking at the time is that Saint Laurent was a huge fan of using models who were not European white. He loved other cultures, other fashion styles, other histories. He loved just learning about other people and incorporating that into his fashion and incorporating the different models into his fashion lines as well. And he is credited as being one of the first designers to put Black, Asian, Arab models down the runway. While he was known for his trailblazing fashion history, he was also known in the 60s and the 70s for his famous jet set life, the party life. If you think of the 1970s, the party atmosphere, the party vibe, the substances that may or may not have been included allegedly, Studio 54, that nightlife, the party scene, that was Yves Saint-Laurent. That was him. When I think of Yves Saint-Laurent, I think of the 1970s and all of the trappings that come with that time. In 1977, he came out with his fragrance, Opium. When I think of opium, I think of the 70s, I think of stilettos, I think of Studio 54 and cigarettes. You know, I'm lucky that I was able to experience nightlife, like clubbing life, way after cigarettes were banned, because I cannot imagine being out inebriated at a bar and people just have cigarettes everywhere. That sounds awful. In the late 70s, he continued to create lush, opulent fashion for women that was comfortable and elegant. And he's also credited as the person who initiated the shoulder pads. That's Yves Saint-Laurent. He started doing this in the late 70s, and the 70s would bleed into the 80s. And that 1980s aesthetic that is rich, opulent, decadent, gold, over the top, that, I mean, if you think of opium, if you think of Yves Saint-Laurent, that is a lot of the imagery that I think of. Something interesting happened in early 70s, in 1973. Have you heard of this thing called the Battle of Versailles? This is not anything you have ever learned in your history textbook in high school, I promise you. The Battle of Versailles. So at the time, Versailles, the chateau, the castle, was in deep need of repair. So they decided to have a fundraiser, and they decided to have a fashion battle. France versus America, the designers clashing in a battle of 1970s opulence and fashion. And so on one side, you had designers like Saint Laurent and Givenchy. On the other side, you had Anne Klein and Oscar de la Renta. And if you would like me to do an episode solely on the Battle of Versailles, let me know in the comments, because I would love to do that. Just to give you a taste, some of the guests in attendance included Josephine Baker, Liza Minnelli, and Andy Warhol. Can you imagine the type of parties that they had? That's ridiculous. Oh my God. So like I stated, Saint Laurent, 70s, jet set, Studio 54, party. I mean, that's all fun and games. Unfortunately, the 70s bled into the 80s, and that party lifestyle continued with him. Unfortunately, it did have some negative health consequences for Saint Laurent. His habits paired with the pressures of work. At the same time, he still had the Yves Saint Laurent fashion house. He was doing ready-to-wear collections, which were extremely successful. He had perfume. He also had haute couture, you know, the elaborate, gorgeous gowns. Like, he had a lot on his plate, and he struggled. He had a lot of mental health struggles with substances at the time. And, you know, partying is fun until it isn't. And it's sometimes, sadly, only when someone gets older that they start to feel the negative consequences. He unfortunately had some health complications, and it culminated into having a runway show where he was almost incapable of walking by himself. Typically, when there's a fashion show, there's the whole fashion show, and at the very end, the designer will come out and take a bow, blow some kisses. Well, because of all the complications and the problems, he had a show where he was sort of like propped on top of the models and could barely walk down the runway. So, he took some time to fix or address some health problems, but it was always a bit of back and forth with Saint Laurent. Like, things were good, things were not good, things were good, things were not good. He was hospitalized in the 90s from the health problems, but also his mental health problems and the substance abuse problems. All of those things just like aggravated each other and worked against each other, and he ended up being hospitalized. In 2002, he decided to close the haute couture, the high fashion part of YSL, of Yves Saint-Laurent. It was just too much. It was just too much for him, so he decided to close it down. And if you want to give yourself a treat, I say go watch his final runway show. It is so emotional. It is so touching. You can just feel the love, the care, not just for him, but everyone there just loves and adores him. It really seems like he was the type of person that was so attachant. It's like very lovable. Something about him was so lovable and so endearing. And it's just so sad that he had so many struggles at the same time. Sometimes genius and mental health kind of go hand in hand, unfortunately. And I think this was the case here with Saint Laurent. And if you go watch this runway show, you will see so many iconic models and muses that were touched by Saint Laurent, and also just grateful because he gave so many people an opportunity that they might not have had. Naomi Campbell, the supermodel, said when referring to Saint Laurent, he had a twinkle in his eye. I think he was the first designer to put women of color on the catwalks, and I'm so grateful to him for that, for giving us a chance to be there. Every other designer has been inspired by him in some way. So he had a huge, huge, huge impact that just rippled across the fashion world, fashion history, pop culture, magazines. He had a huge impact on the entire world, which is why he's considered to be the designer of the 20th century. Sadly, in 2008, at the age of 71, he passed away from brain cancer. And I have to say, 71 is very young. It's very sad. It's very sad. There's no other word. It's sad. It's sad that he was so important and so impactful and such a genius, but also at the same time, just really, really struggled in a lot of ways. And it's sad. And I hope that he found peace afterwards. So I did read some reports here that said that towards the end, he and Pierre Berger, his former partner, like romantic partner, but business partner, actually rekindled and had a civil union, because at the time, France wouldn't allow a same-sex marriage. So they signed some sort of document allowing a civil union. So I think they may have, in fact, reconnected towards the end of Saint Laurent's life. His funeral was attended by very famous models and designers and politicians and dignitaries. Catherine Deneuve was there, Nicolas Sarkozy, the former French president, and the First Lady, Carla Bruni, were there. It was a star-studded affair. Also very sad, just it's a funeral, for crying out loud. But just to show you the impact that this man had on the world. And then his ashes were scattered in Marrakesh in Morocco, because he had actually purchased property and land there, and he felt very much at peace back in North Africa. And I think that this brings us to the end of our lecture on Yves Saint Laurent. Please remember your homework, subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. Let me know if you want me to do a video on the Battle of Versailles. Lots of fun. And yeah, I love Yves Saint Laurent. Something about him is so attachant. Something about him is so endearing and so lovable. And it's just such a shame that he had such struggles. But you know what? You never know. You never know what someone is going through. Just because someone has a fabulous, amazing career. You never know their personal struggles that they're going through. And in spite of his struggles, I'm really happy that he was able to do something that he loved and he had such a positive impact on the world. And that is today's video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Bye.